Hello everyone, I'm going to show you a way that you can basically make a texture design for you to sort of build a lot of different objects without much time at all. This is very similar to trim sheets. In fact, you could probably call it a trim. In this example, I'm actually going to use basically wooden planks to build lots of different things. Like if I wanted to build scaffolding, if I wanted to build stairs, or if I wanted to build like a wooden gate, I can basically construct this special texture. Now, the way that we're going to do this is by building a 400 centimeter by 400 centimeter plane. And basically, we need to build a bunch of shapes in front of the plane. In order to do this, I'm going to build probably 4 different variations of planks. So 2 of them will be sort of wide size planks, about 40 centimeters in terms of the width. And then, of course, they're going to be 400 centimeters wide as well. And then I'm going to make 2 20-centimeter pieces as well in terms of the thickness, and then that it will be 400 centimeters wide. Now, in terms of why we're trying to extend them out to be 400 centimeters, it's because we want this to be a tileable texture, very similar to trim sheets. So what I'm going to do basically is to build, these sort of cubes, and I am extending them to the far left and right side of my 400 centimeter plane. And basically, when I take this into ZBrush, I can sort of sculpt out the details. And then, of course, if I have the wrap enabled, I can sort of make sure that this is a tileable detail that I'm creating on each plank. Now, the only difference, what I'm doing here that I didn't do with my trim sheets, is that I actually have an end to both of to all 4 of my planks. So basically, I made a special sort of cubes for the ends of the planks, and I'm going to sculpt on the details separately. And then this way, when I actually construct these objects, I can, of course, make the front, the top, the bottom of each plank, but I can also account for the ends of the plank, if that makes sense. It's going to all come together once I actually finish baking the texture. And then constructing some of the planks from that texture. But basically, right now, all I'm doing in Maya is going to be very quick in terms of actually constructing this geometry. So at this point, we finished developing the base mesh in Maya, and I have imported both the geometry of the base mesh and the plane as well. The plane there is just designed for me to be able to see exactly how big or how wide I need to constrict or constrain my planks to. Okay, so I'm just using that just to see, like, did I make a mistake? Does it start to smooth out in the end to the point where it doesn't extend all the way to the plane? That is what that's for. Now, along with this, I basically creased all the edges in ZBrush very quickly, so that when I subdivided, it allows me to easily um, add in more subdivision levels without and still retain the shape. Other thing I did was to turn off SMT under geometry. The reason being is because having SMT enabled will actually smooth out your geometry because we have the holes from the ends that I cut out. Okay, so I just disabled that and I bumped up the subdivision level. And now you can see that I'm using a combination of the clay brush, which I'm holding the Alt key to kind of dig in and create a bit of wear and tear on the edges. And then I finish off those edges, those same edges, by using a orb brush from a creator, Michael Vicenti. Now, I am kind of demonstrating that I can expand this sort of details further with some wood brushes that I found online, but for the purpose of this, I'm going to keep it a little bit simple. I can always go back in this file and add in the wood grain later if I wanted to. And now here I'm sculpting on the ends as well. So of course, again, those would be the ends of my plank that I want to sort of bake in this texture here. So I'm just going to go around, and that's pretty much it, you know. The next step would be just to basically decimate this model and then export it out into Substance. Okay, so now at this point, I'm pretty much done. As you can see, everything is covered. I went ahead and made sure there was a little bit of more wear and tear on some of the planks than others, and so I did have some variation here. And now I'm in the process of decimating. Okay, so obviously the four smaller ends on the corner, the bottom right hand corner, are for the smaller planks, and then the larger ones are for the wider planks. Okay. And of course, we also need to export out the plane, the low poly plane from Maya, and then of course export out the high poly geometry from ZBrush so that these can be baked within Substance Painter. Now, of course, just make sure your decimation percentage isn't too high or too low as well. Okay, so at this point, baking in Substance Painter should be pretty straightforward if you make sure you follow two key steps. Number one, you want to make sure that when you're exporting out your files, that they are actually facing the front perspective in your program. So within Maya, that should be the z-axis. Okay, if you're not facing that direction, then you're going to run into issues with the bake. The other thing is to set the max frontal and rear distance to 1. Okay, this is basically ensuring that we're covering the distance between the plane and the high poly geometries to ensure that you're baking everything. Okay. Now, in terms of texturing, it's pretty straightforward, but we just use a bunch of nifty fill layers, and keep constructing that to use, you know, your various mesh generators and things like that. And of course, make sure that you're accounting for both your additional normal map details and the roughness. So this should be pretty straightforward. Okay, so this last bit is us taking the texture maps that we baked from Substance Painter, and we're bringing them to Maya. So basically what I do is I set up, again, a 400 centimeter by 400 centimeter plane. I apply a blend material to this as well, and then I go ahead and apply the normal map and the base color. And so here you're seeing me fiddle around with some of the settings here, just so I can kind of, it's a bit easier for me to visualize what it is that I'm creating. Now, in terms of taking advantage of this trim sheet as well, you know, basically what we're going to do is use very similar sizes to what we built for our for the actual high poly geometry. but we simplify it. So here you're going to see that I'm creating a 400 centimeter cube that has a depth of 20 centimeters, I believe, 20 centimeters. And here I use automatic UV unwrapping to quickly get a nice result. And then at this point, we can simply stack our UV shells and place them within the necessary areas within our texture map. Again, very similar to how you might build your geometry for like a trim sheet, or using any other trim sheet, right? Now, of course, we can add variation to our planks by simply shifting the UV shells wherever we might want. Another cool thing about this, because the way we constructed this, we can actually extend our UV shells outside of the 0 to 1 map space, and the pattern will still tile, which is really good. And so you're going to see me try this shortly. Of course, I'm adjusting UV shells as well, just to make sure we're getting the most out of our bevels there. But again, you can always switch around where your UV shells are placed to add a bit more variation. And again, everything should tile, as you see right here on the screen. And so if you took your mesh and you expanded it out, you can see that it should tile nicely. So if you need a plank that's like really wide, you go ahead and make that. Oh, and at this point, you're also seeing that I'm adding bevels as well. I think just adding in a nice bevel, small bevel to your geometry will just make it a little bit more believable once you place it in Engine. Okay, you may not always do this. It just depends on how large that that object is. But you're gonna want to take advantage of that. But that's it. Okay, so at this point, you can see that I made like a couple of structures here. And this is really just to give an example of kind of the many things that you might be able to create with something like this. I also added an HDR light, just so you can, or sky dome with an HDR image applied to it, so you can at least see a little bit more how the textures will sort of interact with the lighting once you have this on Unreal. Now, some of these, you'll notice that I added a couple of like edge loops in there, and that's really just so I can, create sort of like a bend to my mesh here. Just to kind of give you an example, as you can see, I sort of warped parts of the wood, and I'll just go ahead and move this forward a little bit, like that. So yeah, I warped parts of the wood in certain instances just by adding in a few edge loops, and then I can use something like soft selection, and then I can bend it that way. Alternatively, you can also use deformers, which is what I did for like this bridge here. So if I, just to give you an example, we can take this bridge, go to nonlinear bend, and we can curve this out and have this, rotate and bend in several ways using this tool. So basically, if I wanted to take this gate, which is modular, by the way, this is basically a 4x4 gate. I can take it and I can kind of duplicate this multiple times, like so. And then if I do something like that, I could probably use deformer and maybe make like a curved piece if I wanted to, by going to nonlinear and then using bend here. I just got to rotate this like so. Now you can see I got this nice piece here. Don't know quite what that would be for, but it's just something that you can indeed accomplish with this tool. Now, so if I wanted to take this in to Unreal as its own piece, and of course this could still be modular, so it should kind of line up and look a bit seamless. If it's connected to this wall here, you could do that. But it's just me taking the same UV shells and objects, which are just these couple of cubes here, I made like a wide plank. I made a small plank here. Just go ahead and hide this. And this is like a long piece as well. That's a bit small, similar to these sizes here. And so you can kind of see how I took advantage of the UV shells for them. If I'm selecting each of these pieces, so everything looks slightly unique in terms of how I'm shifting the UV shells. Okay, so you can make lots of things with a single texture, as this one I just created, and it didn't take very long for me to create it. And again, if you just keep in mind, just to sort of make things modular, similar to what I have here, with this sort of staircase that leads into like the scaffolding, you'll be able to build like a lot of stuff in no time. It's kind of similar to what you might see in games like Elden Ring, in terms of how they construct a lot of their a lot of structures that you might find in the game, sort of reused assets, modular assets. I don't know if they specifically use this method, but this is almost simulating that. And of course, we're just using a single texture to do that. And then if I wanted to get some variation in terms of the type of wood this is, then I could probably just change the color of the texture within an instance in Unreal. But that's it for this video. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you found it useful.